Are America's farms going bankrupt at an alarming rate? If you listen to the media, yes. If you listen to me, no. My special guest, Curt Covington, is going to dig into that with me in this edition of The Business of Agriculture. Are you looking for productive efficiencies in growing higher yielding, better performing crops? New Fields Ag provides a complete portfolio of biological products focused on you, the farmer. Visit newfieldsag.com for more information to help you farm better. Hey there, welcome to another fantastic episode of The Business of Agriculture. We're going to talk about something that might be gloomy, but it's also going to be actually very uplifting for you because you know what? As it turns out, the media is hyping something that's not quite reality. You have been told, and you saw it a week or so ago, farm bankruptcies surge in 2025. And then the people over at Bloomberg said that trade wars and rates are pushing U.S. small farm bankruptcies to a 5-year high. To hear some of the media tell it, every farm in America is going bankrupt. Oh my God, it's Armageddon. The reality is 99.9% of the farms in America are not going bankrupt. The rates are actually not that great. We do have some financial, shall we say, struggles in the farm belt, but it's not quite as bad as you have been told. I'm going to dig into the real numbers, the reality, and the outlook with my special guest, Curt Covington of Ag America. Ag America is a lending institution that has a portfolio across all 50 states in farm production and in processing and in agribusiness. He's a friend of the show. He's been on here multiple times, and I said, let's come on here and talk about some reality. It turns out bankruptcy is something he's actually really good at, which means he understands it, and he also has a breadth of the entirety of the United States agricultural sector. Before I hit record, I said, well, here's this Bloomberg headline, and you just shook your head and you called it trash. Let's start with that. The media, even outside of agriculture, Curt, is saying the trade wars and interest rates are pushing farms, especially the small ones, into bankruptcy. And you say, not really.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Damian. It's always good to talk to you. It's always fun. It seems like more of a casual conversation over the fence than it does an interview. So let me just start by saying the problems that farmers have today started a long time ago. They didn't start as a result of trade wars. They didn't start at the beginning of the Trump administration. And in fact, if you go back and look at the numbers, I can chronologically tell you what caused this problem today. And it started back in 2010, 2015. It started when money was free. I would invite any of your listeners, just go look at the interest rate charts that were out there. From 2010 to 2015, you basically rented your money for free. You had the same situation in 2019 through 2020. Again, money was pretty much free and commodity prices were good. Yep. So what does that cause? Well, it causes, first thing, irrational exuberance on the part of farmers, right? Rapid expansion, stupid money decisions, new equipment, extravagant lifestyles, and lenders, to some extent, were partly responsible for this with loose repayment terms. But here's the reality of the matter that I think really good farmers and good agribusinesses understand. It's the old saying that you buy your assets during good times, but you pay for them during bad times. Really good businessmen, really good farmers understand while times are really good, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to break the piggy bank.
Yeah, so a couple of things you hit on there. And remember, I got a very intelligent listening base. We don't have the bumpkin crowd here because it's just not the place for it. This is not coffee shop gossip. This is intelligence. And that's why I love having guys like you on here. When you just said it began 15 years ago, 2010, let's take people back just a little bit because maybe somebody listening to this is, younger and it's like, man, I'm trying to remember. That's about when I was starting out. When you said money was free, what we're really saying here on a contextual basis is we were talking about 2% and 3% money, and largely from 2010 until 2 years ago, we were talking about using 3% money, 2 and 3% type money, which is just about unheard of in the last 50 years, last 40 to 50 years, until those last 10, let's say 15. And so all of a sudden we saw an interest rate that went from 2 and 3 to like 7 and 8. And a lot of people say, oh, it went up 5%. And you and I have talked about this before. When a 2 becomes an 8, it didn't go up 6%. It went up 400%. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. If you look at the money as a cost of a crop input, just like you would if it was a pound of fertilizer. And so this is a pretty big shock to any generation, but especially if you've only known 2 and 3% money, you can see where this kind of caught you a little bit like, shall I say, with your pants down.
Yeah. So it's a really an interesting point that you raised. So let's talk about the compounding effect of this. And I'm not talking about the compounding effect of interest rates. I'm talking about the compounding effects of this. Number one, most borrowers today, if they're going to their operating lender, are going to borrow their money on a variable rate. What has happened over the last several years, last couple of years in particular, there's been a decline in cash reserves at the farm gate. So the farmer goes in, talks to his lender and says, hey, I'm ready to renew my loan. And the lender says, hey, there's just not enough margin in this loan. Go get your loan refinanced. And the farmer says, okay, well, I can do that and inject liquidity into my balance sheet and make my operating lender happy, and I continue on for another year. He goes to his long-term real estate lender who says, hey, no problem. Your real estate loan, however, today is priced at 2.5% fixed, and we can go ahead and refinance this today, but it's going to cost you 7.5% fixed, or perhaps even floating. So now what you've effectively done is you've taken a short-term problem and created a long-term problem, because that debt now is on your books for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And ultimately, if you had made the right decisions during really the good times, and honestly, you want to measure the strength of a farmer, notice how the good farmers behave during the good times, not how anybody behaves during the bad times, but notice how the really good farmers behave during the good times, and you'll see that there's a significant difference in how they manage their finances.
So, well, let's say, for instance, in that regard, you're talking about, for instance, I'm guessing you're going to say they don't grab a bunch of new variable rate money. They take advantage of, like you said, and I've got a chart here about farm sector debt, and we can pull that up in a moment. But we are at a really big high on real estate debt. If that's hanging around at 3%, I've got a little bit of farm debt money, not a lot, and I'm not a real live farmer. I get that. I rent my farm ground out for the most part, but you're in no hurry to pay down to 2.875. Yeah. And so that debt doesn't, to me, seem like bad debt because of where that rate is. But when you talk about what a good operator does in the good times, it's not that they don't take on debt, because you can expand a lot during those good times. I think what you're saying is you avoid variable rate, and you avoid, I think, those decisions of things are so good, I've got to spend money to keep from paying taxes. That's the other big one.
Yeah, so I think number one is, you hit on it briefly, but I could reiterate this, is there's no need to leverage up your balance sheet during good times, right? You want to go out and take on an additional section of ground, and you found a really good deal on that ground. Terrific. Really good farmers will look at that and say, okay, well, I'm not going to put more than 50% debt against this real estate, simply because I can't afford to go out there and put, 80 cents on every dollar or 75 cents on every dollar of that asset in the form of debt. I can't do that. And I can't do that because, number one, I can't sleep at night. And number two, who knows where commodity prices are going to be down the road. That's how good farmers think, right? Mm-hmm. The second piece to all this is that, when you look at these transactions and you say, okay, what are the things that have caused all these problems today? And the reality of the matter is, it's not just some things that farmers have done. And I've said this to you before. Most of those farmers that are in bankruptcy today deserve to be there because of the really poor decisions they've made. But I would say sometimes it's co-opted with some of the bad decisions that the bankers and their advisors, their CPAs, they're lawyers, they're tax lawyers, they're CPAs who have said, look, I really pride myself as a CPA, and you've never had to pay taxes ever in your life. And how have you managed to do that? Well, I go and buy these big green and yellow icebergs every other year, right? And so I get accelerated depreciation. I can write off the interest expense or the lease payment. And the great news is I never have to pay taxes. Well, it's not that you never have to pay taxes. All you've done is kick the can down the road, ultimately kick the can down the road. The really, really good farmers look at this and say, This isn't all just about managing my tax liability. This is about making good, sound decisions for my business, the viability of my business, and the sustainability of this business when it comes to making those kind of decisions. And I would say there are some bankers out there that are as complicit, including myself from time to time, that are complicit in these problems.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the tough part, by the way, is that some operators, they love to produce, they don't love to bank, and so they kind of go with what the bank has them do, and then they get themselves into hot water. I'll give the numbers really quickly, because somebody that might be, really smart and doing a good job and listening to my show says, "But Damian, I heard the numbers are bad." The numbers are actually I told you at the set of the show. Almost 99.8 to 99.9%. There are 1.9 million farms in the United States of America, just under 2 million, okay, a little over 1.9 million. Many of them are not farm operations of consequence. They have farm on paper so they can have some deductibility. They have 3 acres of, with a sheep on it or something. The reality is farming operations that of consequence, I'm not being in any way mean, you're talking about a few 100,000 of the 1.9 million that produce 95% of all of America's ag revenue. And so when you hear about the bankruptcy rates varying by big to small, like Bloomberg is pushing, that's a lot of media emotion. And because they know it creates clicks, because there's this thing still in America about, the small farms and all this. And those same exact people that carry on about the plight of the small farm drive right past 6 small businesses to go to Walmart. I mean, it's an interesting dichotomy, but I want to get into this. In the Q1 of 2024, in the January, February, March of 2024, there were 45 bankruptcy filings in the United States of America in farms. Those are, and then in Q1 of 2025, there were 88. So you could be alarmed that we almost doubled from 45 to 88 in Q1 filings. But the numbers that seems to have caught on, this Arkansas agricultural entity, and then Bloomberg and all these other, and even the ag media, they started using numbers that began April 1st of 2024 and went to March 31 of 2025, Curt. And those are the numbers they kept comparing. And they kept saying year over year. And I'm like, that's not year over year. The Q1 to Q1, I can understand. And then when they started comparing it and saying trade was the reason, there was no trade problem in May of 2024.
Exactly correct. So I've read that Bloomberg article. Or some other things in there that were said that I think are just completely off base. In fact, they're nonsensical. So the tariff piece of this, to your point, there was no tariff issues back in 2024. What the president has done here and the administration has done here is absolutely no different than the last thing he did last time, the first thing he did last time he was in office. Yep. And as you can see, a lot of those, and in particularly what's going on over here with reciprocal tariffs, make total sense. And I would venture to say, if you went out to rural America, and I don't care, if it's a grain farmer in the Midwest or if it's an almond farmer out west, most of them would say, we do need some corrective actions in our, in our import-export policies. Yep. The one that irritated me the most in this, or the other 3 that irritated me the most in this, is suggesting that immigration policy is driving this as well. Let me tell you, I farm out in California. I have clients, a lot of clients out in California. You go out there, I go out there every 2 weeks. You go out there today, there isn't a dearth of laborers. No farmer that I talk to, that I do business with, is having a problem finding farmers. Here's what the problem is. In the state of California, you got to pay a farm worker $26 an hour. Minimum wage.
I threw out 26. What's the number?
Well, the minimum wage, without any suggestion, at the very minimum, is $17, and you're not going to get a farm laborer for $17. You're going to get them for $25, because otherwise they're going to go to construction. That's just simply what's going to happen.
Yeah. So the point, and I want to go back to those numbers again, and then again I want to go to the posturing that we're hearing, and it bothered me that even within the ag media, and I see everything. I try to pension it. There's a University of Illinois outlet in Arkansas and Farm Progress and all that, agriculture.com. But even a lot of them were sort of parroting this. And I want to go through all those reasons that you just said. I want to also remind you, if you like the business of agriculture, remember that this show is brought to you by my friends, Newfields Ag. I'm wearing their shirt right here. And I'm also wearing a hat from Harvest Returns. Harvest Returns, speaking of money in agriculture, can help fund your farm, your ranch, or your agribusiness. It doesn't have to be hard. Your operation is unique, so why should you try to fit a square peg into a round hole? What they've done basically is they grabbed 18,000 investors and they pool their money. And this is for stuff that doesn't fit a lot of normal lending situations. Maybe Curt Covington says, hey, this is great what you're doing over here, but you know what? You're not a fit for Ag America lending. Maybe you should talk to our friends to Harvest Returns. Like, for instance, a guy wanted to expand his direct-to-consumer beef operation and needed some processing facility. That's where Harvest Returns came in. Their pool of investors came up with the money and created a creative financing option. Harvest Returns can bring the capital you need to reach your goals. Visit harvestreturns.com. That's harvestreturns.com to learn more about how you can get started and grow your operation today. So anyway, the numbers were not that bad, but people say, well, wait a minute, you just told me that we doubled Q1 of 25 versus Q1 of 2024. We went from 45 filings to 88. We're on target in that scenario, Curt, to be around 300 filings this year, Chapter 12 filings for bankruptcy. That sounds bad. My research says we were at 600 bankruptcy filings in the farm sector in the year 2019. So to pretend that we're in this awful, oh my God, everybody's losing their farm scenario, it looks like we're going to trend about half of 2019 this year. That's my numbers.
The whole discussion is a rounding error in my book. And I'm going to say this again. First of all, in today's world, it's much easier to file bankruptcy. It's a lot different than it was in the 80s. First of all, in the early 80s, you didn't have Chapter 12 filings.
Right. Chapter 12 is the filing. Go ahead and get into that real quickly. That's specific to farms, and it came
smaller
up
size farms in general.
1986, I think we invented Chapter 12. The government did.
Right. Smaller size farms. Generally, it was farmer friendly, but very few farmers actually fit into that, except for the smaller farmers. From an asset size and revenue size. But again, this is just a bit of a rounding error. So, and I would refer people back also to 2009 when we had the financial crisis. There was a number of bankruptcies then, and the prediction was it was going to double, and it never happened. So again, I think some of this is, attempting to make an issue out of something that doesn't exist at this point.
I just pulled the numbers. If you say there's going to be 300 bankruptcy filings on 1.9 million farms, United States of America, my number is that's 1/100th of 1%, or two 1/100ths of a percent. So you're talking about 99.9+% of farming operations are not going to be in anywhere close to bankruptcy filings. And that, to your point, is even in an environment that is easier to use Chapter 12, which is good for farms in terms of the arrangement. It's easier to go through bankruptcy now than it even ever has been, and we're still not at anywhere close to a record.
Well, let's put some of this into perspective. People don't want to hear this, but they're going to hear it anyway. There is consolidation at the retail level. You're the one that mentioned Walmart. I didn't. But you've got Costco, you've got Trader Joe's, you've got Kroger's, all these retailers that are consolidating. And those consolidated retailers have their rules about how and who they're going to do business with. If you think you're going to grow tree fruit on 40 acres and somehow supply that to Kroger's, you're sorely mistaken. And what I find so interesting about this, one of the things we talk about in terms of our agricultural policy is provide it's always been this way, except during the Obama administration. Is the whole entire goal is to provide the highest quality food at the most economical price to the consumers in the United States. That's always been the basis of our policy. Well, if you believe that to be the basis of our policy, it's not going to happen without farm consolidation as well. It's not. I would venture to say that there's many of those those smaller farmers probably had the opportunity to consolidate, meaning sell out or join up with the kids, or the kids join up with the dad. They chose not to do that. They chose to fight it. They figured the problem would go away. They swept it under the carpet, and here we are today, and they've got no alternative but to simply file bankruptcy. There is going to be continued consolidation in agriculture, and if you don't like that fact, you're probably living in the wrong country. You can go, if you want, to some other country and live in a place where the average farmer is 2 to 3 acres. Maybe that's Vietnam, maybe that's China, and you'll live the perfect dream of the small farm. Unfortunately, you won't be living here, because consolidation is the name of the game.
Yeah, and by the way, those are realities. Those are economic realities. I do have some blowback from people that say, "Well, you know what? I'm not sure this has been good for me." I was like, I don't know. It's good for the consumer. It's been going on. We hit peak farm, Curt. You and I both know this. 90 years ago, in the mid 1930s, is when we had the most farming operations in the United States. It was 6.8 million, I think, is the number. We're down to 1.9 million. I even gave you the numbers that of the 1.9 million, 1.5 million of them are just, unfortunately, farms on paper more than any level of measurable productivity in terms of economic output. These are where things are, and I don't disagree. Now, here's the thing. The administration has been touting a lot about small farms. Brooke Rollins goes all over the media and talks about small farms, small family farms. Is that just posturing because that sells for the media and everybody in America loves to hear that? Or do you think there's going to actually be using this hype about bankruptcies to then justify more financial parachutes being dropped out to smaller operations? Because I've wondered if maybe that's not the end game here. Let the media run with this thing about bankruptcies, and then use it as a reasoning to say, and that's why the USDA is going to throw another $50 billion out here and help small family farms.
Yeah, so that's window dressing. You can continue to throw money out at small time or small size farming operations. You will never cause a change in the tide. The reality is what the reality is. No matter how much money you throw at small farming operations and small family farms to ensure that their existence continues, to me, is just a fool's game. Ultimately, the only way that you survive in this business anymore is through efficiencies, right? And efficiencies are gained through consolidation and growth, right? Yeah. It becomes a function of managing cash flow, not the assets on the balance sheet.
Right. I want to get into the other angle on this of the reasons that have been cited for why there's so many bankruptcies. And you gave, we already talked about, I don't want to go into those again, but I want to dispel those myths. And before I do that, since we do have to pay the bills around here, I already told you about my friends at Harvest Returns. You know the Newfields Ag is our sponsor up front and at the end of these episodes, but I want to remind you also about Redox Bionutrients. Redox Bionutrients is a family-owned company. Darren Moon began this 31 years ago, working in specialty crops. Then he moved into turf and then increasingly into broadacre. It's a new way of thinking about biostimulants to help you with your crop production. We're talking about products like DiCap. DiCap provides unequaled stress defense, increasing plant respiration and antioxidant production. It's also a fantastic source of potassium and phosphorus. You can find out more about DiCap and the entire Redox line. Go to redoxgrows.com. That's redoxgrows.com. All right, so reasons that there are bankruptcies. Trade. You and I have already dispelled that, but there's a persistent belief, and then immigration policy. So, first off, you already said, you've seen it, the headline. Well, because Trump is deporting, and you and I are not Trump apologists. We're just dispelling the myth. Trump deporting immigrants is why farms are going bankrupt. I can tell you that. You don't think that's true? You just said there's no shortage of laborers in California. There's a shortage of farmers that can come up with $25 to pay them based on the margins. And it's just not happening. I know a bunch of people in dairy. We use a lot of immigrant labor and things like hogs, farrowing, milking. Not so much in ranching because, those cows are out there running around kind of on their own. I don't know any farm that's telling me they got a problem that they're going to go bankrupt because of deportations. They might say, I'm having a little bit of a hard time coming up with the money to pay these guys because they can go and hang drywall, put roofs on, landscape, whatever. I've heard that, but I've not heard that the labor pool has been all deported.
Yeah, it's substitution of work, right? You can either work in agriculture, or you can go work in construction, or you can go work in the restaurant business, or you can go work in the hotel business.
Yep.
The reality of the matter is, it's just the economic side of work, and I make more money for my family. Here's the first of all, this idea that immigration policy has caused labor shortages in this country, the place to focus this is any area in this country that grows produce. Hand labor, stoop labor, I'm out there all the time. I have not had one grower tell me I'm unable to harvest my crop because I don't have the laborers. The majority of them are using what are called labor contractors, and those labor contractors have a pipeline to legitimate employees.
Yep.
Either through H-2A or just through their pipeline of employees that come from across the border.
Yep.
And they're fully and gainfully employed, and when the season's up, they go and they harvest another crop. But the reality of the matter is, the biggest problem when it comes to that kind of stuff is the next generation has no interest in working on the farm.
Right.
That has nothing to do with our immigration policy. That just has to do with the fact that a lot of these younger people are saying, you know what, I can go get an education in Mexico or wherever it is, and I can stay there and have a middle income job doing something else. But the reality of the matter, this whole thing about immigration is so blown out of proportion. And I would invite people that say that, including people that write these stories, go out into the fields of California. Go to Santa Maria, California, where they're harvesting berries and veg today. And you look up and down those rows and you will see hundreds of people picking the crop and picking it on time and getting it in the cooler and going to your Kroger's grocery store where you're buying it, and it's the cheapest, highest quality produce you will find in the world. And I'm done preaching about this.
All right. So bankruptcies on the farm are nothing to do with immigration policy. Then the other one is, of course, trade. And I have a lot of people that really believe this. And again, I point out, there's no customer in some foreign country sitting there with a wallet full of money and an empty plate with no food on it. They are being supplied, and it just becomes this mindset. And I have intelligent people that argue with me. They say, no, Damian, you understand. Because there's trade disputes, we're not selling our stuff. I said, maybe, but it doesn't mean they're going without. In other words, Brazil just produced 6.1 billion, 50% more soybeans than the United States will. And their harvest that happened in spring, because they're 6 months off of us. And the idea that it's persistent, it's worse than persistent, it's pervasive in our industry, Curt. We have people that believe that we would have $15 soybeans and $7 corn again if there wasn't spats over trade. And I'm like, right now, the whole world is oversupplied.
This is just a supply and demand problem. This has nothing to do with tariffs. And honestly, short of a very few, let's take, and again, I'm a West Coast guy, but I think it provides a really good example, right? Take a look at almonds. 80% of them are exported, and a good majority of those are exported to countries that we're having disputes with.
Yep.
Last week, 2 weeks ago, the objective report came out. Almond prices, by the way, have been climbing ever since this tariff talk has started. And China continues to buy, by the way. Let's just be clear about that. All of a sudden, the objective report came out and said the almond crop is a barn burner, one of the largest crops ever. Whether you believe the USDA or not, the buyers do. Okay, you had a 60-cent drop in the price of almonds. Well, guess what? The first thing that came out was, how are we going to sell all these nuts? This 60-cent decline, a good sum of that majority is because the buyers overseas won't be able to afford the tariff, plus be able to afford, just just the whole gamut of things. And so here we are today. Prices have rebounded. Buyers are realizing, hey, maybe that objective report isn't absolutely correct. And, this has, again, even with the tariffs in place, many of these industries find other countries to trade with. They've been through this before. They saw this coming when Trump got elected, and they said, okay, we love the guy. We know this is coming in a number of these industries. Let's make sure that we have created other markets, because that is a really important, and you would be surprised, many of these commodities that we have in this country, they have found other offtakes for their exports, right? Maybe not to the degree they would have had with China, for example.
Yeah.
But it's out there. So I struggle with the tariff thing being the reason for where we are today with regard to bankruptcies.
So I agree with you, and a lot of people don't like to hear that because they want to believe there's an easy fix, and the easy fix is find some other place to sell our stuff to or work out a deal with China. And I'm to the point where my eyes glaze over until I finally hear it enough, and then I almost start pounding the table. I've heard about China so much. My today's newsletter just went out, and it was all about the reality of China. And you and I both know we've got a bunch of people in our industry. They've heard it so long that they just think all I want to do is go make milk, grow blueberries, produce soybeans. China, and you want to tell them that's not causing these farm financial problems right now. A glut of agricultural product globally is causing it.
That's causing it. Plus, there's just, I'd say there's kind of a windfall here as well. Everyone might recall during the last administration how input costs rise 40% across the board. That was irrespective of interest rates.
Yep.
I'm just talking fertilizer, labor, chemicals, just the most common ones you think of. And I hear today, well, a lot of those costs have moderated. They have moderated, but they're not back to where they were.
Right.
And I don't think they will be until we get some of these issues resolved. For example, when it comes to oil-based inputs, there's nothing better than to have your own supply of oil and natural gas to get these things done. And if you're relying on other countries to provide you the oil and other resources for that, those costs are going to remain consistently high. You're not going to do anything about labor. The reality of the matter is labor is what labor is. But
you mean the price of labor is probably not going down, and that's where automation might be our hope. The point that Curt is making right here, if you're not an ag person, or even if you are, you might say, what are you talking about, oil-based or petroleum-based? Remember, a lot of our crop inputs use petroleum they're derived from petroleum. So there's that. And so we're talking about the reasons that there are farm financial struggles. And we said, okay, it's not trade, it's not immigration policy, it's labor, it's input prices, which, as you said, have moderated, but they're still maybe 50% higher than they would have been 6 years ago. Yep. And your commodity prices for a lot of the commodities are back to where they would have been. So in other words, if you're buying the same inputs and paying 50 or 60% more for them, and this would include machinery, and you're making the same money grossing as you did 6 years ago, it doesn't take long until you're upside down.
Yeah, and I'd say there's just one other thing that no one likes to hear this, but I'm going to say it anyway. The reasons there's these depleted cash reserves across some of the farm community is because, during the good times, their lifestyles blossomed, I would say ballooned maybe as well, right? It was the vacation home in Arizona. It was the 40-foot diesel pusher. It was the brand new home built at the top of the hill on the family farm. It's sending 3 kids to private school instead of the junior college down the street. It's employing all the family members that you've ever known in your entire life because you now have the money to pay for them and want to feel responsible for them. Guess what? With few exceptions, most of your living expenses are fixed expenses and very, very difficult for 2 reasons to go away. One, some of them can't without literally selling them, right? If the vacation home, whatever.
Yeah, right.
Perfect example. You build the new beautiful home for the spouse, it's not going away. Sending your kids away to private college, maybe you can, figure a way out of that one. But even that one's hard. The reality of the matter is, it's more of an emotional thing. Most people cannot change their lifestyle, even during difficult times. And I tell you, the really good farmers, the ones that don't, go look at the ones that are successful, that are small, medium-sized farmers. They live within their means.
Yeah.
It's very simple.
I just heard him say there, you know what? It's hard to go back. It is. I'll tell you what. I never worked my way up to Champagne, but I also I stayed at Coors. But I'm not gonna go from Coors down to Keystone Light. I just can't do that. So I agree. I know what I know this pain. Let's talk about farm debt really quickly, because this is a chart I printed off. And if you happen to be listening, that's fantastic. If you're listening, remember, you can hear the Business of Agriculture on all audio platforms, basically all the podcast audio platforms. But really go to my YouTube channel, please, and hit subscribe. I'm really wanting to grow my YouTube following. I didn't put any effort into YouTube until January, and now we're up to 7,000 subscribers. I'd really like to get to more than 10,000. So go there and do that. But I'm holding up this chart so you can see it if you're watching the video. And it's in inflation-adjusted dollars, or as you might know them, real dollars versus nominal, as they're sometimes described. And it's got a chart going back from 1970 to 2025 from one side to the other. It's got non-real estate debt and then real estate debt. So non-real estate would obviously be equipment, operating loans, et cetera, and then real estate debt. A huge growth in real estate debt is the blue, and then the lighter color is non-real estate debt. But the thing that bothers me about this chart, inflation-adjusted debt on farms is higher now than it was in the 1980s that you've heard so much about.
Yep.
We have a boatload of debt out here, Curt, and at some point, debt service, we can talk about inputs, we can talk about lifestyle expense, debt. There's going to be some debt service problems out here, which makes me think I've got a couple of scenarios I see, but I want the expert. What scenarios do you see because of this debt? Is it a problem?
Well, first of all, if you look from, I may not be exactly right on these numbers, but I think since 2010, farm real estate debt has grown somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 billion, $110 billion. That's a function of two things. One, good time expansion.
Yep.
And two, having to refinance shortfalls in their operating lines of credit. If you look at that chart, you notice that the operating debts haven't increased at the same pace that the real estate debt has. Again, some of that's expansion related. The other is because they've kept the operating debt tamped down by real estate refinances.
And by the way, and so that in case you're not, and like if you're one of these people that's not as financially minded as Curt, the problem he's going to tell you with that is you used your dirt, which had a nice your appreciation in value. I'm sitting here in Indiana where they're talking about $14,000 farm ground that was $7,000 7 years ago. You used your appreciation as debt, and the problem that Curt's going to tell you is when you use your hard assets to continue to have operating money, the problem is.
Yeah, the problem is you start running into cash reserve problems. You start running into the inability to service that debt. You run up the possibility in these low commodity price conditions that we're seeing right now that land prices actually could deteriorate. And here's one of the bigger issues. There is a lot of that term real estate debt that will come up for refinance at some point over the next 2 to 3 years. The problem is that debt was taken out when you could afford the debt and you showed the ability to service that debt. Guess what? That loan matures. That loan cannot be, in a lot of cases, they're going to have a very difficult time refinancing that debt because the interest rate today is much higher. The cash flow off the farm is much lower. And the lender's going to say, nice try, but we're really not interested in refinancing this debt. And here you are out there with a matured real estate loan with no one that is willing to refinance you, or very few. And so where do you end up? You end up at hard money lenders who will find a way to get your loan refinanced. You'll pay 10.5%, 11%, 12% for that money. And you'll be happy to pay that, by the way, because the alternative is foreclosure on that real estate. And here we are in a position where we never wanted to be. because we never possibly thought that commodity prices could fail, that interest costs would be so high, that input costs will remain above levels that they should be. And now the alternatives are very, very few.
Okay, so we're calling this the reality on bankruptcies and finances with Curt Covington because you've got a massively good handle on it from across all parts of the country. I'm looking at where I see things going. My friends that are in ag real estate may not like to hear this. I think there's easily 10% of give on ag real estate when you look at a lot of it is still owned by farmers and they have a heavy debt load, and farmers were a lot of times the buyers during these good times bidding it up. If farmers sit on their hands because they aren't there. Now, some can still do this, but a 10% give in the real estate seems almost like expected to me. What do you think?
Oh, without question. There are parts of this country today where land values have dropped 25% from their highs 2 years ago.
Okay, next prediction. I think that there's going to be a parachutes of money by about October dropped from the government out here. And again, the critics will say, well, he wouldn't have had to do this if it wasn't for the trade war, which is complete bullshit. And then the other reason is going to be, well, we have to do this because of China. I think that's where some of this whole thing about China's buying our farmland and all the threats to America, I think they're going to use that as posturing to dump money out here. They did $31 billion between December and March. I could see that much again. What say you?
I'd say it's probably going to happen. I hate to say it, but you're probably going to see it.
Okay, next thing, since interest rates do play into this, I could see Trump and the administration in general beating the drum some more against the Federal Reserve. I've already seen Jerome Powell be compared to Fauci, which I don't necessarily disagree. He's a bureaucrat. He's sort of unaccountable, and he also is able to do whatever he wants. And while we twist and writhe out here in the pain, I could see a lot of pressure on the Fed to say, you need to do something about interest rates because people can't buy homes, and now our farms are going bankrupt. Is this going to be? Will it even be a discussion on beating down interest rates?
I think there's going to be a beat down on interest rates, number one, and I wouldn't be surprised in the farm sector area. You're going to see, call it whatever you want to see, administration is going to come out with a market facilitation program for farmers who say, look, I can't survive on $4 corn, I can't survive on $11 beans. And
whatever the price would be on almonds or anything else
or anything else, and Trump and the administration will pick their battlefields and decide which markets should get some type of financial support, which I'm not a big fan of, but I know that I've seen this before, and I just referred to it as a market facilitation program. The reality of the matter is it's just simply a subsidy program for farmers. I call it parachutes of cash, but the point is you can call it MFP, you can call it subsidy. Loan deficiency payment was my other one years ago. Yep.
When the LDP thing first came up, and my brother Eric, who works for USDA, was explaining to me, and I kept saying, so then the payback rate. And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, you called it a loan. Loan means payback, deficiency payment. What's the payment? And he says, no, the payment's this much to the farmer. I said, what's the payback schedule? And he said, I don't know what you're talking about. And that's when I discovered they can call it a loan, but it wasn't a loan. It was a parachute of cash.
Yep.
And I'm not in any way being mean or judging. I guess if I was out here and I was in the farm business and these were my numbers and the government was going to give me money, I'd take the MFP or the LDP or whatever the hell the next thing they pull out. What else do you see happening? You see this bankruptcy thing. Like I said, we're on target, let's say, for 300. Because more filings, I believe, usually happen in Q1 than happen, say, in the middle of the year, and then we have some at the end of the year. So call it 300. That's not a big number. Do you see this number getting big? Do you see bankruptcies doubling from here, tripling from here?
No, I don't see it getting to that point. The reason it doesn't happen this time of year, right, is that now the farms are at the point where their operating lender has, I hate to use these terms, but I'll use it, right? They're already half pregnant. They've got all their money in in the right. I mean, the farmer has all his money invested. He's got a crop. It's identifiable. He knows whether there's crop insurance proceeds or whether he's going to actually be able to grow a crop and sell it. And the farmer's sitting there saying, okay, well, if he gets four for his corn, and I've got this much invested in it, I'm likely to get my money back. And so I'm not going to put a lot of pressure on him until the harvest comes. The harvest comes, we see what the price is, we see if they do with their crop, and we find out that they, again, for the third year in a row, now have a carryover on their operating loan.
Yep.
That's when you start seeing more pressures that'll come from operating lenders who say, I want my money back. I rented you cash, I want my cash back. I lent you cash, I want my cash back.
Yep.
The farmer says, I don't have the cash to give you for the third straight year. I can't go out and get a refinance because I got no way to repay that loan. I can't find a long-term lender. And all of a sudden, you will start seeing Q1 of 2026 some additional filings. Do I see a ramp up between now and the end of the year? I mean, look, there's some that have just delayed the inevitable. You and I both know this, right? They just keep delaying the inevitable, that, right, something's got to get done. They can't find buyers. The market is, while it's stable in terms of real estate values across the U.S., pretty stable. Yep. The activity is very slow, regardless of the community you're in. So ultimately, these guys have just kicked the can far enough down the road that they'll make it again through this crop cycle, but I think you'll start seeing some upticks in Q1 of 2026. But from now until the end of the year, I think things will, you're going to see some, but you're not going to see a lot, in my opinion.
One thing that I appreciate, I kind of agree, I could see more, but the change in tide of age, this is my last topic on bankruptcy. There, you're a little older than me, and I'm old enough to remember the 80s, and I talk about this. I'm not the guy talking about going to school in a blizzard, walking uphill and all that crap, but I remember the 80s, and I was there, and I lived through it, and it was terrible. The younger crop, the folks that listen to my show here that might be 40 and under, essentially, they've only seen ag good. I think that this is going to be a real, test. It's not like, oh boy, they need to be put through this, and go through. I'm not saying any of that. I just think it's going to be a real mindset adjustment for the younger. And I'm not just talking about the producers, Curt. I mean, if you're an agribusiness, because I'm hearing it from the folks that are 35 years old and say, oh man, things are really bad. And I said, maybe not. And I said, nah, they're not as bad as have been. I think there's going to be a mindset adjustment for the younger people in this industry that have not quite seen this, and they might see these headlines and say, "Oh my God, bankruptcy up at a 5-year high." And I said, "Yeah, but on a percentage basis, it's just about minuscule, as you said. It's a rounding error."
Yeah. So here's the deal: that age group really hasn't seen bad times. I mean, they've seen some bumps in the road, but they've never really seen bad times. Honestly, one of my bigger concerns as it relates to this is this younger generation is hooked on technology. Technology is expensive. I get it. In certain parts of the country, the technology is replacing expensive labor.
Yeah, right.
In the story. But when we talk about companies like John Deere, they're not a tractor company. They're a technology company. And this whole idea of selling the next generation of farmers on technology is an expensive decision.
Yeah.
And, a lot of these kids come out of ag schools, or they come out of business schools, and the first thing they learn about is how great the technology and how it's going to improve the overall efficiency of our business and how it's going to replace labor. I have never seen in my 45-year career where technology has actually replaced labor. All it did was displace them so that those laborers could go do something else.
Yeah, so there's the concern, again, and it's good that I said, I don't think there's I don't pull that thing about, these young people these days. No, I don't do any of that. It's just that there's a little bit of a mindset shift because we haven't quite been through an extended period of financial turmoil. And so if this thing sticks around for 5 to 10 years, which you and I both absolutely believe that it can and maybe very likely will, there's going to be a younger generation person that says, oh, well, we had a little blip there. Oh, it's really bad. But boy, it's not a 1 year thing. I could see this being 7, 9, whatever, maybe perpetual because of demand and supply issues.
Yeah.
And as you said, the one concern might be if you're 37 years old and you're an ag in any capacity, you've been indoctrinated from all the companies that are in the space. Update your technology, and it could be a pricey enough thing that the return on it it'll give you some more efficiencies, but a 2% gain in efficiency in a break-even environment, it's going to be hard then to amortize.
Well, yeah, welcome to the new normal, right? Because that's kind of where we're at this point, and I think that's a really good point that you bring up, is that this may not be just a short-term bump in the road. This, to me, is kind of the new normal, and I find it fascinating. All these programs out there that are intended to bring in young, beginning, and small farmers, I get it. I think it's really important. But if you're going to bring in young, beginning, and small farmers, you can't just you can't just talk about it, right? Let me tell you, the USDA alone, the U.S. government alone, is not going to help bring young, beginning, and small farmers into the business. It's not going to happen. You know how it's going to happen? Where there's some cooperation between lenders and the government and that farmer that says we're going to have a unified transition, like they do, honestly, like they do in New Zealand in the dairy industry, right? They have cooperation between the government, the lenders, and the dairymen that says, I've identified my successor, and that successor, I'm going to start effectively deeding a certain number of cows over to him every year, to the point when I'm ready to hang up my tennis shoes, he or she is the new dairy owner. The lender actually cooperates in that, and the New Zealand government supports it.
Yeah.
We don't do that. People just throw out these, hey, USDA, young, beginning, and small. No one's making those loans. You might as well just call it a grant.
Yeah, right.
You ain't going to get paid back.
Yeah, that's the thing, and it's also not significant enough. So there's going to be a challenge on the financials. So your point here is, if we're talking about actually a concern about this, the younger person in ag, and where we are, if we sustain at this economic situation, which I believe that we will for a while because of the supply issue versus the global demand, who's going to say, oh yeah, you're 40 and you're ready, we're ready to saddle you with $16 million of debt to assume this agricultural enterprise. Oh, also you're in a break-even endeavor.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to finance that.
And the longer time goes on here, more and more industries in agriculture, sectors in agriculture, I guess is the better way to describe this, are going to find themselves at the mercy of retailers. Mm-hmm. Already specialty crops are at the mercy of retailers. You don't run your farm, the retailer does.
Yeah.
And to say, well, that's never going to happen in commodity crops. Okay, good luck on that one. It'll be the manufacturers that tell you, this is the quality we want. If you can't provide it for me year round, I'll go find somebody that can. And it's going to happen. It's a natural progression through consolidation.
Which, by the way, then that means that they should take the financial risk, and at some point you're just a contract producer, which might be the answer on farm bankruptcies, because then you're honestly just doing everything on a contractual arrangement, and the caregiver. It does remove a lot of autonomy, but it also removes some of the financial risk, which is a story for another day. But on a bankruptcy thing, your last thought, you and I both agree the bankruptcy thing has been overstated. It could get worse based on the things that you and I both just believe, that if the interest rates stay where they are and inputs don't do a decline, and then there's going to be a life raft of money coming from the government. You and I both predict that, but that may not be enough. We could be here for a couple of years, and then bankruptcies might get back to where they were in 2019, which is still not catastrophic.
Yeah, we're in for some probably some difficult times for a while here, and it is going to be a bit of a new normal where everything is today. But I just want to reiterate to your listeners, this problem was created a long time ago. It started in 2010 with free money, and I you can see it. If someone says to me, "Hey, you can buy this house for free," in other words, you didn't hardly put any money down in that house, right? Maybe I got to put 1%, 2%, 3% down, and then you can borrow it at 2% for 30 years. Why wouldn't you do it?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You can't fault anybody for being
Yeah.
where they are. I would take in the same thing.
So, but then, commodity prices collapse, interest rates, to your point, increase 500%, stubbornly high input costs. There is no solution for this other than to hang on for the ride if you are, have a balance sheet that can't support this.
Yeah. His name is Curt Covington. The company's called Ag America. They're a lender in all 50 states. If you want to learn more about Ag America, where do they go?
www.agamerica.com.
All right. And remember my sponsors, Redox, Harvest Returns, and Newfields Ag, and check out all of their websites. They might have a product that can help you in your agricultural enterprise. If you enjoy watching the Business of Agriculture, check out my new show, The Granary. We shoot it here at my on-farm tavern with my friends from Extreme Ag. It's a great show. Talk about everything from the personal to the professional. It's a lot of fun, and you can find that at extremeag.farm or go on YouTube and just type in The Granary, Damian Mason. You'll find it. It's on the Extreme Ag channel. Thanks for watching or listening. Share this with somebody that can enjoy it. And Mr. Covington, you'll come back again sometime?
You bet.
Always. He's great. Thanks for being here. Till next time, I'm Damian Mason, and this is the Business of Agriculture. Hey, sincere thanks for joining us here on another episode of the Business of Agriculture. I want to ask you, if you farm, are you looking for more productive efficiencies to grow higher yielding, better performing crops? Well, of course you are. Newfields Ag provides a complete portfolio of biological products focused on you, the farmer. If you want to learn more about the Newfields Ag product lineup, go to newfieldsag.com for information.